this is a big, big term, 2017, if only because, at least with respect to voting, this may be the most consequential term in decades. Am I overstating that?
Well, I think on the question of partisan gerrymandering, this is the moment. That is when party is being used to draw district lines, and whether or not that is something the courts are going to police. The big case, Gill v. Whitford, coming up. On other cases, including a case out of Ohio, and now we know the Texas redistricting cases are going back to the Supreme Court. Not clear if there'll be blockbuster in that area, but certainly on the question of partisan gerrymandering, everybody's watching this case.
So why don't you walk us through Gill v. Whitford? That's going to be heard on the first week of the term, and help us understand what it means that the court is going to dip into this question of partisan gerrymandering after a very long time of wanting nothing to do with it.
Right. So it is one of these issues that has divided the justices for decades. The question is when, usually we're talking about state legislatures, draw district lines either for their own legislature, drawing their own lines, or drawing them for Congress. It's not unheard of for legislators to draw lines in self-interested ways, not only to protect incumbents, but to give a particular party, the party in power, an advantage. It's happening more by Republicans than Democrats these days, I think for the simple reason that Republicans control more state governments than Democrats, but it's not only a Republican problem. And in fact, another case waiting in the wings comes from Maryland, and there's a claim of a partisan gerrymander there. So the question is, how much taking political consideration and drawing lines is too much? In the 1980s, in a case called Davis versus Bandemer, the Supreme Court said, yeah, we can hear these cases, and here's a standard. And the standard proved to be so impossible to meet that there was never a successful partisan gerrymander case brought in any court after that. Then back in 2004, the key case was called Veith versus Jubilerer. It arose out of Pennsylvania's districts. And there the court divided 4-1-4, which is an odd division. 4 justices led by Justice Scalia said, we don't have any standards to decide when taking party into account is too much in drawing district lines. These cases are non-justiciable. Courts can't hear them. They're kind of political questions. The 4 liberal justices disagreed, said we can hear these cases, and they each set out a bunch of different standards based on bad intent or bad effect or a combination of the two. And Justice Kennedy stood in the middle, and Kennedy said, I agree with the liberals that courts should be open to hear these cases, but I agree with the conservatives that all the proposed standards so far are unmanageable. So, yeah, we'll hear your cases, but you're going to lose unless you come up with something else. And you can understand the last 13 years as a struggle to come up with something else that would satisfy Justice Kennedy, and the Wisconsin case, Gill v. Whitford, challenging the districts in Wisconsin, tries to come up with a new standard or a better standard that could satisfy Justice Kennedy and presumably the 4 more liberal justices to start policing this before Justice Kennedy might leave the court in a retirement, as people expect, if not this year, coming up in the next few years.
So stop for a minute, Rick, and just tell us, because as you've suggested, this is happening all over, but the court in Gill is looking at this Wisconsin gerrymander. Can you just paint a picture of how that sorted out and why it certainly looks to the naked eye like a pretty partisan political gerrymander that we're talking about in Wisconsin?
Well, Wisconsin is one of those states. Another one is North Carolina, where we think of them as pretty evenly divided between Democrats and Republicans and people who lean with them. And so you'd expect to have, roughly equal division of legislators or members of Congress if we're talking about congressional redistricting. But in fact, the way the legislative lines have been drawn, the Democrats might get a majority of votes but not get a majority of seats. And so that's a kind of asymmetry or a kind of bias in the plan. In the North Carolina case, this is one of my favorite facts from the case, North Carolina was found to have been a racial gerrymander, and we can talk about that after. But to remedy that, they engaged in a new redistricting where they explicitly said on the record, we are engaging in a partisan gerrymander because they know that there's been no standard to police these. And they asked one of the legislative leaders, given that it's a 50-50 state, why did you draw 10 of your 13 congressional districts to favor Republicans? And the answer that this legislative leader gave was because we couldn't figure out how to draw an 11th. And I think this is what, if you give the people who are in power the chance to draw the lines, they're going to sometimes take advantage of it. And the question then is there a standard to say this is too much? And courts are going to come in and they're going to put some brakes on this.
So here's where you get to explain, and really I did caution listeners that you think you're glazing over, but this is critically important. We actually have a test, at least in Gill, in the Wisconsin case, and it's called the efficiency gap. So talk to us, Rick, as though we've maybe been asleep all summer, about what that is meant to be measuring and whether the folks who think, hey, here is your workable standard, Justice Kennedy, whether this is something that really could be the silver bullet for the Supreme Court.
Sure. So the efficiency gap is a measure of partisan bias in plans. It comes from, in redistricting plans, it comes from work that was done by Eric McGee of the Public Policy Institute of California and Nick Stephanopoulos, who's a professor at the University of Chicago. And it's basically a way of measuring wasted votes. And what I mean by a wasted vote, or what they mean by a wasted vote, is, it only takes a plurality of votes to win. You just have to get more than the other guy. If you stick a whole bunch of Democrats or Republicans or African Americans or whoever into a district, if you pack them in, so there's a district, say, that's 75% Democratic, you're wasting those votes. And so what they try to do, because you only need 51 out of 100, say, if we're taking a simple thing, and you put in 75%, what the efficiency gap tries to do is measure whether a plan is biased towards one party or the other. Is it packing or cracking, dividing up what could have been a majority district, helping whatever group is being cracked? Is it wasting more votes of the party out of power than the party in power? Now, even the authors of the efficiency gap don't present this as the holy grail for Justice Kennedy. And the lower court, it was a 3-judge court, said the efficiency gap is something to consider, but it is not the only thing they're hanging their head on. And so while much has been made of this measure, it is really one of a number of tests that have been put forward in these cases to try to show that there is a manageable way to figure this out. And I should point out one more thing, which is that what's happened since the 1980s and even since 2004, when the court decided Veep, is that computers have helped redistricting and big data have helped redistricting authorities make more efficient gerrymanders. They're able to draw gerrymanders that last throughout the decade. So even as population shift, even as political winds change, they've proven to be pretty resilient. And there's a brief from Professors Grothman and Gaddy, probably two top redistricting people in the country, who say now is the time to start reining this in. And Gaddy was actually someone who's been involved in drawing Republican districts and gave some aid to the Wisconsin legislature when they were trying to figure things out early on in terms of how to draw the districts. And they're saying things have changed technologically, and maybe that's the reason now for the courts to get involved.